So how about we do yet again another Transformer Slag podcast Patreon listener question. Once again, if you want to be part of the Transformer Slag podcast Patreon, help support the podcast. Let us know we're doing a half-decent job here in the Transformer world, educating you and keeping you up to date with all the news, reviews, and otherwise. Again, patreon.com/Protoman, or check the pinned comment or the description below to join. What does it get you if you join us? Well, it gets you your name in the end credits scroll at the end of every segment moving forward. Gets you access to the exclusive Transformer Slag podcast Discord, where we share the news, break the news. We have deals. We save you money on your hobby. All that important stuff, rare downloads, and more. And just good hanging out and discussing Transformers. It's just a cool little group of people that we got going on in our exclusive little Discord. Also, depending on what tier you're at, you might even be able to get a little something in the mail, or even access to do the Patreon listener question. We have a Patreon listener question from longtime patron Cringe McCringle. And Cringe wants to know, hey Proto, I think I have a Patreon listener question for you. So a couple months ago, I bought the Transformers Victory DVD set at a local convention. And I finally got around to watching it, and it entered my mind this thought. What if the live-action Transformer movies managed to be as successful as the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Do you think that we would have seen Japanese characters like Victory Saber or Deathsaurus show up? And how would you have wanted the live-action movies to be with those characters? Thank you very much, Cringe McCringle. Well, you know what? There's two things to that, because the one thing you said here, what if the Transformer live-action movies were as successful as the Marvel MCU? They were more successful than the Marvel MCU initially. I mean, let's put it this way: the Marvel MCU is huge, but they also got a machine behind them that's known for pumping out a lot of stuff. And they really, that truck didn't even get momentum until much later. And the reason why I say that is because when you really think about it, right, 2007 Transformers movie, right? At the time, there was no Marvel MCU. So when that came out, $710 million, box office success, launched Transformers to the moon, made it a household name again after many years of really just kind of coasting by. I mean, Unicron Trilogy was successful on a toy level, but not on a global pop culture level. And but the 2007 movie really kind of brought Transformers back. The last time before that, and I've said this before on live streams, Transformers had like 3 peaks in its history of pop culture, like infamy. In 1985, during like right in the heart of Generation 1, when everyone knew what Transformers was, it was being bootlegged, it was being parodied. 1985 was peak Transformers back then. And for the longest time, I felt that Transformers would never get that high ever again, because the following time it was just as popular was in 1997 at the peak of like Season 2 Beast Wars, where Transformers was huge again after many years of being stagnant. Ninja Turtle boom, Power Ranger boom, even Pokemon was just going to be a couple of years away. So Beast Wars came out and really kind of, became that #1 best-selling boys' toys during the holiday season in 97, even beating out video game consoles, which is something I'm going to bring up later, because video games have a lot to do with the decline of toy sales and Transformers' interest with people. And after that, I was like, well, that's it. That is it. But, we reached another peak at that point when those Michael Bay movies came out, where, and I'll be honest with you, bigger than G1 or Beast Wars ever was in those peaks. So 2007, Transformers was taking over the world, and there was no MCU then. In 2008, that's when that Iron Man movie came out. I think it was May of 2008. I remember it was around my birthday. And that movie came out, and it did okay. It's a great movie. People love it, but here's some reflection. Transformers 2007 made $700 million. That Iron Man movie, it made $585 million. It didn't make the same amount as the TF movie did. And then in 2008, later that month, we had the Hulk movie, which that made nothing. It made $264 million, barely broke even if you even thought about advertising and stuff. So in 2008, there was the cornerstones in the beginning of the MCU. Those movies came out, and they didn't even come close to what Transformers did. Then in 2009, there was no MCU movies. There was nothing. But what happened in 2009 for us? Revenge of the Fallen. And what I say is, regardless of what you think of the Revenge of the Fallen movie, that's a whole other discussion in terms of the quality of the movie and stuff. But that was the peak of Transformers in the world and people being obsessed with the brand regardless of what walk of life you were. And Revenge of the Fallen came out and made $836 million. It just totally rocked it. And people loved going to see that movie over and over again, regardless if you think it's any good or not. It made people buy toys like crazy because of the credibility of the success of Transformers. It jump-started a whole bunch of different sublines, and Classics was in full swing, and everything was going great for the brand. Masterpiece was pumping out a lot of product. Everything was doing gangbusters. Gangbusters. The following year, in 2010, we had Iron Man 2. How did Iron Man 2 do? 623 million. Still not even close to the first Transformers movie even. And then in 2011, Thor came out. 449 million. Now again, these are great movies, but they didn't exactly resonate with audiences on a ticket selling level that it made people want to go see these things. Dark of the Moon came out in 2011 and it made $1.1 billion. And again, regardless of what you think of Dark of the Moon as a movie. Now, I'm going to stop there for the moment because what I'm trying to get at is, at that time, Transformers was killing it. They were, for a lack of better words, the shit. They were the big brand. Because even after Thor, you had Captain America, the First Avenger in 2011, 370 million. Like, all of those movies leading up to Avengers, the first Avengers movie, which will be in 2012, but we'll get into that in a moment. But literally from 2007 to 2011, there was a bunch of Marvel movies, there were a bunch of Transformer movies, and Transformers was killing it every single time. Every single time. At that point, the lowest making movie was the first one at 700 million, and none of those Marvel movies could even touch that one. Dark of the Moon had $1.1 billion. So give that perspective for a second. So like the MCU really wasn't, really rocking it. But then Disney came in more specifically for when we got to the Avengers movie in 2012. And they put that machine behind it. And when you put the Disney machine behind it, that crooked mouse Disney machine that'll do anything for money, lie, cheat, and steal. I'm not a big fan of Disney when you really know the whole background of it. It's a whole different animal. It's a whole different animal. And that Avengers movie made more money than any Transformer movie ever made. $1.5 billion. And then kickstarted, in my opinion, that's when the MCU really became mainstream and kickstarted everything from that point on. And then, of course, when we get into everything that came after that Avengers movie, Iron Man 3, Thor Dark World, Winter Soldier, Guardians of the Galaxy, the second Avengers movie, Ant-Man. I mean, they were just firing on all cylinders at that point. And granted, in 2014, Age of Extinction made $1.1 billion, so it still did well. But by the time we got to 2017 with The Last Knight, and you had, like, literally, when you look at the machine that Disney was putting out, which was a whole bunch of movies, sometimes 2 to 3 movies a year, where we got a new Transformer movie once every 2 years, once every 3 years if we were lucky. By the time The Last Knight came out in 2017, we had already had Civil War, Doctor Strange, the second Guardians movie, the Spider-Man movie. We were already piled in MCU stuff that The Last Knight only made $600 million. And that's when the writing was really on the wall, that Transformers was in trouble and the MCU was going to be the next big hotness for pop culture. And it is. Don't get me wrong, it really is. And that's coming from someone who's a lifelong Transformer fan. But I think the writing was on the wall in a lot of ways even before that, in that around the time of Dark of the Moon in 2011, I remember Skylanders came out, and people are going like, oh, why are you talking about video games, toys to life kind of thing? I feel that there's a connection there. Because when Skylanders came out in 2011, you just kind of had this thing where it was the last breath of children caring about physical plastic toys. Skylanders came out and people weren't buying Dark of the Moon toys. They were buying Skylander stuff. And that's children. That's when Transformers was still marketed at a younger demo. And a year later, when you had Skylanders Giants in 2012, like Dark of the Moon merchandise was being clearanced. The line was canceled. It barely made it to 3 waves, where Revenge of the Fallen, you know, just a couple years before was like at wave like 7 or 8. Like there was a huge thing. And of course, in 2014, Amiibo would come and continue that a little bit. But also around that time, you know, when you think about it, in 2007, the iPhone came out, and the iPhone was really expensive in 2007. So kids weren't exactly asking for something that was like $499 when literally just the year before you could have got a PlayStation for that price. A kid would have wanted that, or the Wii even in that same year, or even the DS Lite, which I think came out in late 2006 also, if I remember correctly. Like kids would have wanted something like that. Video games are very important to that demographic as opposed to toys. They was starting to shift heavily. By the time you get to 2011 or 2010, 2011, iPhone 4 had come out. You know, the iPad came out in 2011. You know, cell phones and iPads started to become, you know, an item that kids would want for Christmas on top of video game consoles. That the writing was on the wall also from Transformer toy sales that kids were not going to be wanting this stuff anymore. Not too long after that, you go a couple more years, and Toys R Us is no longer a thing in the United States. So there's a lot going on there that, I'm sorry if it sounds like such a long-winded answer, but it really helps people understand. And by the time we get to the Bumblebee movie made $468 million. By the time the Bumblebee movie came out, we had Infinity War, which is the #1 selling movie of all time. So it's so hard to compare it now. But like I said, between 2007 and 2011, from Transformers, the first movie, to Dark of the Moon, in between Iron Man and the first Avenger, Captain America, Transformers was #1. Transformers was rocking it against a handful of Marvel movies. Now, your question then asks, what if they were as successful? They were. And they did have a shift culturally because of that success. Now, you say, like, would we have seen Japanese characters? I don't really think so, just because how that shift would have happened would have been what was successful in those movies. And I see that because when you look at what the Unicron trilogy was and the characters that they were propping up pre-2007, it was characters like Hotshot and Red Alert, that version of Red Alert in the Unicron trilogy, and that version of Jetfire, and so on. When you look at the success of the 2007 movie and what characters were featured afterwards, granted they were already trying to push away Transformers Animated, that was a contingency plan, but then they were like, you know what, then we're going to focus on a Bumblebee that isn't just a small little character that's going to be a sports car. We're going to have an Optimus Prime that is a long-nosed truck. And this is like looking at Transformers Prime and how it affected how storytelling would be with Transformers afterwards, and featuring an Ironhide character and featuring a Ratchet character and having characters like Barricade not just be a micromaster that he was for years and years before the 2007 movie. Now he's going to be a police car, and he's going to be retroactively a police car in even kind of these Neo G1 universes and stuff like that. So there was a change within Transformers when the 2007 movie reached those heights, but it was a change that was affected by what happened in those movies. In the same way that, I mean, I used to, as a lifelong also Marvel comic book collector since I was a kid in the 80s, I mean, I'll never forget the story I always tell people is that the first issue of Rocket Raccoon, the original run from, I think it was 1987, if I remember correctly. Correct me if I'm wrong on that one. But I remember it sat on the wall of my comic book store that I used to frequent all the time, Carsey Comics. Doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately. Carsey was one of the many people that went down due to the Big V. Rest in peace, Carsey Comics. But they had it on the wall forever, to the point that like it almost like stained the wall, you know, that it just kind of hung on. And then Guardians of the Galaxy came out, and that book was gone. And what that told me is, you know, all of a sudden there was all this interest in characters that were like C-list characters, D-list characters, Z-list characters. You know, who was Star-Lord? And you could joke about it, like, you know, in the movie it's like, who? But no, that was like literally even people who were longtime Marvel fans were like, Star-Lord, who? You know? But now everyone knows him. You know, so it's kind of a thing where even the success of the Marvel books, the Marvel movies, Marvel Cinematic, changed the public perception of characters that were nobodies. And it's the same thing with Transformers. With those movies, it shifted the interest and everything like that. Now you have Guardians of the Galaxy cartoon characters. which you would have never seen that unless it was like a cameo in an X-Men episode or something. Or Silver Surfer with Fox back in the day. You know, maybe that's how you would get a Drax or Pip or something like that. But anyways, point being is that I don't think we would have saw Victory Saber or Deathsaurus even if they reached those Marvel Cinematic Universe heights, just because what would have happened instead is they would have just taken what they already had and doubled down on it. Not to mention, this always goes into the conversation too, and I know people hate to hear it, but trademarks are always a thing. And they probably would have been like, you know, why would we go out of our way to use 2 obscure Japanese characters and trademarks that we currently don't have when we have like all of these other trademarks? You know, like I'm pretty sure they rather use a Straxus and bring that in, or they rather use a Devcon, or they rather use even like a Transmutate. I could see a Transmutate, honestly, before Deathsaurus in some cases, just because of how Hasbro kind of handles things. And I've had this discussion in private with certain Hasbro people, and people who know who I talk to could take a guess who that is. But, you know, when the MCU was really starting to get momentum after that first Avengers movie in 2012, those conversations came up to diversify and create a kind of Hasbro cinematic universe. And it just never panned out. Those G.I. Joe movies didn't work out. The Battleship movie didn't work out. They couldn't get Rom the Space Knight off the ground. They couldn't get the Mask movie off the ground. Like, there was hopes. You know, when you couldn't even sell that stuff on the base level, where people weren't really crazy about G.I. Joe TV shows, that, you know, when they did The Hub, they were paying attention to what shows people were watching. Oh, people aren't really watching that, you know, Gem. And when we did that Gem movie, you know, that was a bomb. No one turned out for that. And like that Gem movie in a lot of ways also made Hasbro open their eyes in a lot of ways to other stuff and other brands that they had. The only other success that they really had, and it was it was success that they didn't expect, was the Friendship is Magic My Little Pony stuff with the bronies, and how they kind of got an audience they didn't really want, unfortunately. It kind of made them cringe a little bit. And but it's just the way I see it is, I don't think they would have been there. I think they would have just they would have doubled down on what was working already with the current stuff. And now look, we have Rise of the Beast coming out, and Rise of the Beast is going to be a very G1 meets Beast Wars kind of, you know, collaboration in a lot of ways. If that movie is ridiculously successful, then that is going to reverberate and affect other Transformer product and what we'll get in the future. If it's not successful, then, you know, back to the drawing board like it always is, and see you in another couple of years and we'll try again. It's, you know, I look at G.I. Joe and how they tried with 2 movies and it didn't really work. I always say, if you can't succeed with The Rock, you got something wrong with your brand. You know, I mean, if you put The Rock in your brand and no one's showing up, something's wrong, you know, and it's just something where we're going to reach a point now where the Snake Eyes movie came out, that didn't do well, and then, you know, Hasbro people going like, well, G.I. Joe fictionally in the mainstream is going to go into a coma for a few years, and then we'll try again later. And it's something where if Rise of the Beast doesn't do well, it might have that G.I. Joe fate, where the toys will still keep coming. They'll probably do a show here and there, Netflix, but they might take a little break from movies if Rise of the Beast doesn't do well. So that's the bigger kind of concern, if anything else. Bringing in Japanese characters are more a luxury of success than anything else. And that's why you said, like, you know, if they were successful as the cinematic universe, they were. And then when they were as successful, they were pulling in other stuff. They were doing other things. To them, it was more important during those peak successes to bring in stuff like Wrecker's trademarks and you know, bring in Shockwave and stuff. There was such a huge, you know, plethora of Transformer characters that already existed of those B and C tiers, that to then go into the Japanese bubble and start pulling that stuff out when you haven't even done Ultra Magnus yet in the movies, when you haven't even done at the time, like let's say before Dark of the Moon, Shockwave, like it's something where you're almost better off just kind of sticking to that. And that right there, if you look at like 84, 85, 86 characters, not looking at Beast Wars, not looking at anything outside of that, you know, or Simon Furman Wrecker's stuff and UK books and everything, if you just stick to 84, 85 toys and 86, That's plenty of characters to pull from. Plenty, you know. Look, we took Hot Rod only showed up in The Last Night. You know, they could have went with Hot Rod. RC could have been like a featured character instead of just like an appear and disappear kind of thing. There's a lot of ways they could have went about it, but that's for a whole other discussion, in all honesty. But thanks for the Patreon listener question. I hope I didn't go too long rambling on this, but it just gives people a bit of a perspective because, I mean, I lived it. I was there during G1. I was there during Beast Wars, and I was there day one on that 2007 movie. I was at a preview screening, actually, with a bunch of friends. There's a great recount of it on another podcast I did where me and my buddy Brian and a whole bunch of people that I knew, we went to the preview screening. Like, it must have been like 20 guys I knew. We went to that. And, you know, like, I was there to see that rise of interest where there was all these people that didn't care about Transformers, and I knew them my whole life. And then when this movie came out, all of a sudden they're like, hey, I like this. And, you know, it shifts culture. So hopefully Rise of the Beast, hopefully, shifts culture again. Hopefully people will show up and enjoy this movie and, you know, give us another boom for the brand. Or it could go the other way. But I can't make that prediction until that day comes. And I think it's smart for Hasbro to kind of move it a year later. Obviously, it kind of messes with the toy releases. But I think it's a smart move in the small sense that it'll give them a better footing and opportunity and foundation in order to get that audience to go into theaters and create that buzz instead of a world that we live in today where most of the movies that came out within the Big V bubble didn't find success just because of the cultural impact, because we just couldn't go out and hang out with friends and go to see the movie, then go out to dinner afterwards and talk about the movie and be excited about it, then go to the stores and buy the product or engage with the product or you know, go to conventions and cosplay as the product. Like there's a whole lifestyle that comes afterwards that leads to the success of these big franchises, whether it be Star Wars or Marvel or DC. And Transformers is part of that. But you need to have that foundation. And if you can't have that foundation, it's a lot harder to grow. You need good soil for that plant to grow. You need good soil. Anyways, guys, let me know what you think. That's just my take of my rambling. Hope it didn't go too long. How long did it go? I'm just kind of curious. I got to turn my head here. Oh, geez, 20 minutes and set. Okay. Anyways, if you want to be like Cringe McCringle and give a really good question like this that has Proto Man ranting for a little while, again, patreon.com/Protoman. Or if you just want to join the Patreon and just support the podcast and let us know that we're doing a good job and hang out in the Discord, again, patreon.com/Protoman. Check the pinned comment or description below. And like I always say, rock out with the robots